freight wagon train destroyed. The wagons and horses taken. Corn for the whole winter. Blankets, guns.
For millions of viewers, Jay Silverheels was the steady figure riding beside the Lone Ranger, the quiet partner whose calm presence felt unshakable. But off-camera, his experiences told a different story, one that was far heavier than the polished image shown on television. When he famously said, "Tonto is stupid," people assumed it was just a quick joke, something tossed out casually. It wasn't. Those 3 words held years of frustration, exhaustion, and silent resentment. He knew the character made him recognizable, even beloved, but he also understood how deeply the stereotype wounded his culture. Jay carried that tension every time he put on the costume, knowing that fame had come with a price he never fully agreed to pay. To understand how he ended up trapped inside a role that both elevated and diminished him, you have to start far from Hollywood's bright lights, back on a crowded reserve where his real story began. Jay Silverheels entered the world as Harold J. Smith on the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario, in a home overflowing with siblings and empty of resources. His father, Alexander, was a decorated World War I veteran whose bravery earned him the Military Cross. But medals didn't stop the government from paying him barely enough to survive. Pain echoed through his days, persistent headaches, damaged hearing, and limited mobility. Harold's mother, Mabel, carried the family on her back, using traditional medicine because Western doctors refused to treat Indigenous families or demanded money they didn't have. Poverty wasn't distant or temporary. It was a daily pressure squeezing the family from all sides. The Smith household found strength in community and tradition, but the struggles carved deep marks into young Harold's understanding of the world. Even as a child, he learned that survival depended on grit, resourcefulness, and an unwavering will to push forward. Despite the hardships surrounding him, Harold discovered early on that he possessed something rare: speed. Lacrosse wasn't just a pastime on the reserve, it was a lifeline, a cultural pillar, and for Harold, the spark that lit his escape route. By 5, he was already impressing older players with how quickly he could maneuver across the field. By 19, he'd joined the Toronto Tecumsehs, stepping into professional box lacrosse under the name Harry Smith. Traveling with teammates and cousins, he played in packed arenas where fans cheered the lightning-footed Mohawk athlete. His nickname, Silverheels, started during one blistering sprint when he moved so fast it looked like flashes of silver trailed behind him. Newspapers picked it up, and audiences started coming specifically to watch him play. Lacrosse didn't erase poverty, but it offered something his early life rarely provided: admiration, opportunity, and momentum. Even as Harold's athletic reputation grew, the world around him tried to strip away the identity that shaped him. Canada's residential school system overshadowed the reserve, designed to erase Indigenous language, culture, and connection. Children caught speaking Mohawk were beaten or forced to swallow soap, while others returned home unable to remember the words they once grew up with. Harold's sister experienced this firsthand, leaving school with her language fractured. The government labeled Indigenous people lazy or unfit, embedding stereotypes into policies and public opinion. These messages filtered into classroom lessons, job opportunities, and simple daily interactions. While Harold excelled in lacrosse, he understood deeply that the outside world saw his success as an exception, not proof of capability. His rise wasn't just athletic, it was an act of resistance. Every goal he scored contradicted a system built to minimize him and silence his community. When the Great Depression hit, its impact on Indigenous families was devastating, and Harold's was no exception. Jobs vanished, opportunities collapsed. His parents struggled just to keep food on the table. The family moved to Buffalo, seeking work, but the promises of the city quickly faded. Harold took any job he could: farm labor, heavy lifting, anything that brought in a few dollars. His father, once a respected war hero, now fought through constant pain while living on government assistance that barely covered basic needs. His mother traded family belongings to secure food, stretching every resource until it snapped. Government-issued rations arrived spoiled or infested, reminders of how little their well-being mattered to those in power. These years forged Harold's determination. Hunger didn't just shape his body, it shaped his character, teaching him to push through humiliation and exhaustion. That resilience would become the foundation for every chapter that followed. By 1932, Harold had fully stepped into the world of professional lacrosse, earning around $75 a game, real money, during the Depression. He traveled across cities like Montreal, Buffalo, and Atlantic City, playing against tough competition and fans hungry for excitement. One rough match in Montreal changed his profile forever. After a brutal foul, Harold swung back, triggering a brawl that left the arena buzzing. The league suspended him, but when he returned, ticket sales exploded. Audiences weren't just watching games, they were coming specifically to see the fast, fearless Mohawk athlete who refused to back down. Promoters realized he wasn't just another player, he was a draw. Yet even as crowds chanted his name, the world outside the arena still saw him through the narrow lens of prejudice. On the field he was celebrated, but off it he remained judged, underestimated, and limited by society's expectations. Eager for new challenges, Harold stepped into yet another arena boxing. Fighting as a middleweight, he made it all the way to the Golden Gloves semifinals at Madison Square Garden, one of the most iconic stages an amateur boxer could dream of. Under the bright lights, he showed the same speed, grit, and determination that made him a standout in lacrosse. Then came the punch that changed everything. A single brutal strike shattered his jaw in two places, ending his boxing potential instantly. The injury forced him onto a liquid diet and cost him almost 25 pounds. Most people would have let the setback break them. Harold didn't. Instead, he used the experience to toughen his resolve. He learned how quickly life could redirect him, and how pain could become a strange kind of compass. The end of his boxing dream didn't close a door. It pushed him toward a new, unexpected path. In 1937, Harold traveled with his lacrosse team to Los Angeles, expecting nothing more than another series of games. Fate had other plans. While sprinting across the field at Gilmore Stadium, he caught the eye of comedian Joe E. Brown, who was watching from the sidelines. Brown needed someone athletic for a small film stunt and approached Harold with an offer. The stunt, a diving catch, took 11 takes, each one demanding precision and grit. Harold nailed it and earned $150, more than he made in several lacrosse games combined. That moment rewired his thinking. Hollywood wasn't just glamorous, it paid. Soon after, he got his Screen Actors Guild card, adopted the name J. Silverheels, and began landing small roles. They weren't glamorous, but they were steady. For the first time in his life, the possibility of a stable income and a different future felt within reach. Jay's early years in Hollywood were far from glamorous. Most of his work came as a stuntman, earning less than $20 a day and relying on late-night dishwashing jobs just to cover rent. Casting directors treated native actors like curiosities, often ordering Jay to remove his shirt so they could evaluate his physique before even considering his acting ability. He was repeatedly assigned nameless roles: scouts, warriors, and background riders whose only job was to look authentically Indian. Still, Jay showed up prepared, studying scripts, practicing lines, and improving his craft. In 1939, he landed a paying role in Drums Along the Mohawk, earning $350 a week, more than he had ever seen. The studio loved the name Silverheels because it sounded mysterious and marketable. Yet, even as the name gained recognition, Hollywood rarely placed it in the credits, keeping him visible but unacknowledged. Throughout the early 1942s, Jay appeared in film after film, even though his name often failed to reach the credits. He played small roles, scouts, messengers, and riders who flashed across the screen for seconds. But Jay used every opportunity to sharpen his skills. A friend handed him a copy of Shakespeare, insisting that if he could master those lines, he could handle anything Hollywood threw at him. Jay struggled at first, wrestling with unfamiliar language, but he kept practicing until the rhythm became natural. His service during World War II interrupted his progress, and records of his military work remain patchy, but the experience added discipline to his already relentless work ethic. When he returned to Hollywood in 1945 under the simplified name Jay Silvers, he found the industry unchanged. Native actors were still pushed aside, white actors still played native roles, and opportunities remained painfully scarce. Jay's determination carried him through one of the most degrading periods of his early career. In 1946, while auditioning for Captain from Castile, he starved himself just to fit into the costume the studio provided. The director demanded he strip to the waist during the audition, inspecting him like merchandise. It was humiliating, but Jay needed the job and took the part, even though he remained uncredited. Around the same time, he toured the American South with his lacrosse team, where racism followed him constantly. Hotels denied him rooms, restaurants refused service, and he slept on buses or in uncomfortable lobbies while his white teammates slept comfortably inside. In Louisville, police threatened him for using a bathroom marked "Whites Only," a reminder that no level of talent could shield him from discrimination. These experiences didn't break him. They sharpened his resolve to fight for better treatment and representation. After years of appearing in the background, Jay finally earned recognition when director John Huston cast him in Key Largo in 1948. Acting alongside Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, Jay played Tom Osceola, a Seminole fugitive whose presence added emotional weight to the story. For the first time, his role wasn't just a blur in the corner of the frame. His name appeared in the credits, and audiences remembered his performance. 2 years later, he appeared in Broken Arrow, a film praised for being progressive, even though it still placed white actors in dark makeup to portray native roles. Jay played Geronimo with dignity and seriousness, standing out even as Hollywood continued to limit native actors' reach. These moments hinted at what he could accomplish when he was finally allowed to step into meaningful roles. But even promising progress came with barriers Hollywood wasn't ready to dismantle. In 1949, Jay won the role that would define his life for better and worse. When The Lone Ranger moved from radio to television, producers searched for someone who looked authentically native, but hesitated to give native actors a real chance. Jay auditioned against more than 30 men and came out on top. On the 15th of September 1949, he became Tonto, the first Native American actor to portray a native character on mainstream television. Kids across America adored him, and his image became iconic. But fame carried a hidden burden. The role elevated him into household recognition, yet locked him inside a stereotype Hollywood refused to update. Casting directors saw him as Tonto permanently, not as a talented performer capable of range. While the show gave him unprecedented visibility, it also built a cage around him, one that would shadow every opportunity he pursued afterward. Tonto's name carried a sting that Jay felt for years. In Spanish, tonto means stupid, a fact Jay was painfully aware of. While producers brushed it aside, Native communities recognized the insult embedded in the character's identity. Jay played Tonto with professionalism, posing for photos, signing autographs, and greeting fans who saw him as a hero. But privately, he hated the name and what it implied. During a 1957 visit to his home reserve, someone asked him what he truly thought of his most famous role. He answered with 3 sharp words: "Tonto is stupid." It wasn't sarcasm. It was honesty from a man who had spent years trapped inside a role that undermined the intelligence and depth of his own people. His quiet resentment reflected the deeper message. The character celebrated on screen was built on a foundation of misunderstanding and disrespect he could never escape. Jay built a reputation on set for altering his lines, not out of laziness, but necessity. The dialogue writers handed him was often clumsy, full of broken English meant to sound native, but instead, it reduced entire cultures to fragments. Jay refused to deliver lines that made his people sound foolish, so he improvised simple phrases that felt more natural. "Me wait here. You go into town. That right." These became iconic, but they weren't what writers intended. Some directors were furious. One, William Thiele, became so enraged by Jay's ad-libs that he had to be physically restrained. But Clayton Moore, the Lone Ranger himself, defended Jay, insisting the improvised lines sounded better. Jay didn't have the power to rewrite entire scripts, but he used the doc. Small influence, he had to protect the dignity of his character. Even inside a stereotype, he fought to make the image less harmful. Life behind the scenes of the Lone Ranger was far from glamorous. The show's modest budget meant corners were constantly cut, and Jay felt those cuts more than most. In the early days of filming, he and Clayton Moore didn't even have real dressing rooms. Instead, they changed into heavy suede and wool costumes inside a gas station restroom down the road. The heat on outdoor sets, especially around Chatsworth, turned the outfits into ovens. Jay reached his breaking point one day and refused to get dressed. He wasn't loud or confrontational, he simply stood still, waiting. Moore quietly warned him that delays could cost people their jobs. But Jay didn't move. The next day, private dressing rooms appeared. It wasn't a grand victory, but it mattered. Jay wasn't just asking for comfort. He was demanding the bare minimum level of respect that every actor deserved, but he was rarely afforded. As the Lone Ranger grew into one of the most popular shows on television, Jay became a familiar face to millions. Children dressed as Tonto for Halloween, reporters asked him for interviews, and fans followed him everywhere. Yet the fame didn't match the compensation. While filming the series, Jay earned about $100,000 per season. A respectable sum for the time, but still only half of what Clayton Moore made. It was a pay gap that spoke loudly about Hollywood's hierarchy. Jay wasn't seen as a co-lead, despite sharing the screen in nearly every scene. And once the show ended in 1957, things only grew more limiting. Producers viewed him as Tonto forever, offering roles that looked and sounded exactly like the character he wanted to escape. He had become iconic, but the industry refused to see beyond the mask. His fame gave him visibility, but not equality. In 1955, during rehearsals for a fight scene, a stuntman fell onto Jay, and something immediately felt wrong. Clayton Moore noticed Jay walking strangely and followed him to his trailer, where he found him clutching his chest. Jay was suffering a heart attack. For someone who had once been a blazing athlete, the moment was terrifying. Years of heavy smoking and constant stress had finally caught up to him. He was forced to take 8 weeks off from filming, leaving a noticeable gap in the series. Instead of pausing production, the writers created a replacement character and dismissed Tonto's absence with a single line. He was in Washington, visiting the Great White Father. The ease with which the show moved on cut deeply. It revealed how replaceable Hollywood believed native characters were, even when played by a man who had worked tirelessly to elevate their visibility. Away from cameras, Jay was simply Harold Smith, a father navigating complicated family relationships. His first marriage to Bobby Smith collapsed by the early 1942, leaving him distant from his first 2 children, Steve and a daughter, whose name appears differently in various records. A few years later, he married Mary DeRoma, an Italian-American woman who became his partner for life. On talk shows, Jay often joked that he married an Italian to get back at Christopher Columbus, calling their children Indolins, part Indian, part Italian. The humor was lighthearted, but it hinted at something deeper. Identity wasn't simple for him. At home, he was witty, articulate, and fluent, far from the broken English portrayal the public saw. Yet his fame was tied to a character he privately resented. Even in quiet moments with his family, the shadow of Tonto lingered, shaping how the world interpreted who he was. After The Lone Ranger ended and the 2 feature films were completed, Jay continued acting, but the industry offered him little variety. Throughout the 1,960 seconds, he appeared in shows like Wagon Train, Rawhide, Daniel Boone, and The Virginian. The titles changed, but the roles didn't. He was almost always the scout, the warrior, or the guide. Even when he delivered strong performances, scripts rarely gave his characters depth or meaningful dialogue. As the civil rights movement grew, Native activists began speaking out against harmful portrayals. Tonto, once viewed as a friendly TV icon, became a symbol of damaging stereotypes. Leaders like Russell Means used Tonto as an insult, the Native equivalent of Uncle Tom. Jay suddenly found himself caught in a painful divide, criticized by his community for a role he never controlled and boxed in by Hollywood, which refused to let him evolve beyond it. As criticism toward Tonto grew louder, Jay refused to ignore it. He understood the pain behind the complaints, but he didn't believe that boycotting Hollywood would create real change. Studios didn't depend on Native actors enough for a protest to make an impact. So Jay chose a different strategy: slow, deliberate, and aimed at the next generation. In the early 1,960 seconds, he helped launch what would eventually become the Indian Actors Workshop. By 1966, it held weekly classes in Los Angeles, teaching Native performers acting, voice control, stunt techniques, and confidence building. Jay believed that if more Indigenous actors could enter the Screen Actors Guild, they could demand better roles. Instead of yelling at the gates, he tried to open them. The workshop became a home for talent and hope, offering training, mentorship, and a sense of belonging Hollywood rarely gave Native artists. The workshop wasn't just about acting, it was about identity and empowerment. Jay saw the struggles many Native families faced: alcohol abuse, lack of representation, and generational trauma, and he wanted the workshop to address those issues too. He wrote letters to leaders like President Eisenhower, Vice President Nixon, and television executives, urging them to rethink how Native characters were portrayed. Jay didn't have illusions about immediate change, but he believed planting seeds mattered. One young performer who benefited from his efforts was Michael Horse, who later portrayed Tonto in the 1981 Legend of the Lone Ranger and gained wider recognition through shows like Twin Peaks. Jay's influence stretched far beyond his own screen time. Through teaching, he gave Native actors something Hollywood had denied them for decades: a pathway, a skill set, and a belief that their stories deserved to exist. As the 1,970 seconds began, Jay embraced a surprising second career: harness racing. After earning a provisional driver's license in 1974, he trained horses at Hollywood Park, finding peace in the rhythm of the track. Even without a spotlight, his presence brought fans, especially when he toured racetracks back east. His connection to horses ran deep, mirroring the discipline and patience he had carried through every chapter of his life. Years later, a horse named Hi-Ho, Silverheels, would break a track record at Los Alamitos in 1996, with his widow Mary and son Jay Jr. watching proudly. But Jay never saw that moment. In 1975, he suffered a series of strokes that left him partially paralyzed. Another major stroke in 1976 severely disrupted his speech. For a man who spent years trying to reclaim his voice from stereotypes, losing it physically was a painful, unforgiving twist. On the 17th of July, 1979, Jay arrived in a wheelchair on Hollywood Boulevard to receive his star on the Walk of Fame. Surrounded by Native dancers and supporters, he managed only a few soft words, but the moment carried enormous weight. Hollywood had taken decades to acknowledge him beyond Tonto, yet now his name would be permanently carved into its sidewalks. Less than a year later, on the 5th of March 1980, he died at 67 from complications of a stroke and pneumonia. His ashes were returned to the Six Nations Reserve, where his journey had begun. In the years that followed, his legacy grew. He was inducted into the Western Performers Hall of Fame and the Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame. His influence extended through his family as well. His son, Jay Silverheels Jr., worked in film and television, navigating the same challenging path his father once walked. Jay Silverheels left behind more than a character. He left a blueprint for resilience. The Indian Actors Workshop helped cultivate indigenous voices that would later reshape film and television. Productions like Smoke Signals and performances by actors such as Graham Greene stood on groundwork he helped lay. Yet, Jay never fully escaped the shadow of Tonto. He admitted that each time he delivered broken English lines, he felt a sting inside. Still, he found ways to reclaim himself. During a 1969 appearance on The Tonight Show, he walked out as Tonto and declared, "My name is Tonto. I hail from Toronto, and I speak Esperanto." In one playful, brilliant moment, he flipped the stereotype on its head. Jay spent his life trapped inside Hollywood's idea of a native character, but he refused to let that idea define him. In the end, he took back the story and the stage.